Hi everyone, and welcome to Scaleform's first webinar. This webinar was put together for newcomers to Scaleform and covers all the relevant points. Hopefully you'll have a better understanding of what Scaleform is and what it can do for your project after we're finished. If you're not new to Scaleform, towards the back half we'll cover all the cool new stuff in Scaleform 4.0. If you have any questions, please hold them until the end of the presentation, and then Nate and myself will be happy to answer those questions. My name is Matthew Doyle. I'm the Technical Marketing Specialist here at Autodesk Scaleform. I'm an ex-game developer myself and worked in the industry for about 8 years as an environment artist as well as a level designer, and there's some of the titles that I've worked on at the bottom. As an artist designer, most of my experience with Scaleform comes in at the end user level. But also here today with us is Nate Mitchell. He's our resident Scaleform developer, and he'll be manning the chat channel for any questions you guys might have that I can't answer. Nate has extensive experience using Scaleform developing internal demos, as well as our UI kits, and even helped Epic build the UI for their upcoming game Gears of War 3. You can ask questions via chat during the presentation, but we'll also have time for the Q&A session at the end of the presentation, so if you'd like, please hold your questions until then. We're hoping to do more webinars in the future as often as possible. If you have any particular webinars you'd like to see, whether they be tutorials, technical details, etc., please let us know and we'll definitely get those out for you guys. So let's get started. So what is Scaleform? Well, Scaleform is the leading UI middleware solution in the games industry. The technology is Flash-based, and I'm sure most of you are already familiar with Flash. The difference, though, is that Scaleform is hardware accelerated, making our runtime much faster than the standard Flash software player. Now, chances are your studio has Adobe's creative suite of tools already, as most game artists use Photoshop fairly extensively, as I can attest. And that means you also have the Flash Professional Editor in your toolset, which, along with Photoshop, is really all you need to create next-gen 3D UIs. Let's summarize a few of the key features of Scaleform. Scaleform allows for high-quality, animated, anti-aliased vector graphics, as well as the use of bitmap images to create your UI. It comes with a dynamic font system. Now, fonts can be embedded in the Flash file and even shared between Flash files. Larger fonts are broken up into vector shapes, as you can see here on the image to the right. And it also supports rich text, allowing for multiple fonts in the same text field, image embedding in text fields, as well as HTML text support. Scaleform also provides masking support, allowing arbitrary shape clipping and shape animation. And it supports blend modes such as add, multiply, and screen, as well as filter effects like glow, drop shadow, and blur. Now, even though Flash is a 2D tool, Scaleform provides extensions for translating and rotating all your Flash content in 3D space. If you've seen Crysis 2 or Dead Space, you've seen great examples of what can be accomplished using 3D UI elements. And Crysis 2 in particular actually used Scaleform to do that. One problem developers often face when creating UIs for games is the challenge of dealing with multiple aspect ratios and resolutions, as well as UI elements that need to be resizable. In Scaleform, you can use an extension called Scale 9 Grid, which helps deal with this. And the latest major release of Scaleform has been redesigned from the ground up with a fully multi-threaded backend. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later on in the presentation. Here's a peek at the Scaleform core. Now, I'm not the most technical guy out there, but I'll try to explain this to you. Scaleform provides a Flash runtime and loader. The runtime handles all timeline-based animation, maintains the Flash movie state and render tree, and communicates with the ActionScript virtual machines. Now, ActionScript is Flash's built-in scripting language. The loader loads SWIFTs, which are compiled Flash files, and image files, and it supports background progressive loading. We provide virtual machines for both AS2 and AS3, which are separate and optional. The virtual machines interpret the bytecode embedded in the Swift files, which are the published Flash files. Scaleform has OpenGL, Direct3D, GCM, and Wii API renderers, and we provide Win32, OS X, Linux, iOS, and Android executables as well. Now, Scaleform also provides a video solution sold separately, allowing you to either embed videos in your Flash content or play the videos full screen. These videos are high definition resolution, high performance, and they use the cost-effective CRI codec. They support multi-track 5.1 audio as well as subtitling and cues. Also available from Scaleform is our input method editor. Our input method editor basically allows for Asian language support on a standard keyboard. It includes a language bar and status window for changing the language, and it closely replicates Windows IME. Scaleform ships out of the box with full audio support. This allows you to play back embedded MP3s, waves, and other formats. By default, we use Fmod, but you can plug in whatever audio backend you'd like, and we have hook-based sound playback possible through WWise. The Scaleform workflow is intuitive and simple. Once your engineers have integrated Scaleform into the game engine, very little programmer support is needed from that point forward. The majority of the work is artist-driven, but we also recommend having someone who is a competent scripter to handle the interactivity of your UI. All the art is created in Photoshop and Illustrator, as well as Flash Professional itself. Now, videos can be built in any video editing tool such as After Effects or Premiere, or Autodesk Flame and Smoke and Inferno, and then converted using our video encoder to USM's Scaleform's video format. All the art is then brought into Flash, and interactivity is added here via ActionScript generally. However, you can instead do all the interactivity in C++ or your game's scripting language, such as Lua or Unreal Script instead. The UI artist and designer can also view their content outside the game engine via Scaleform's player, and profile the content via AMP, our performance profiling tool, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. So why would you want to use Scaleform when you could probably roll your own solution? For one thing, you have the confidence of knowing that Scaleform has been used by some of the highest rated developers and highest rated publishers in the business. In fact, Scaleform has been used by 19 of the top 20 publishers. Scaleform has been used in over 800 games and apps to date and counting. Some of the newer ones include Crysis 2, Dragon Age 2, Mortal Kombat, StarCraft 2, and so forth. And the list is very distinguished. It includes some of the highest rated AAA titles in the business, and we're very proud of that portfolio. Scaleform has support for every major platform, including Xbox 360, PS3, Nintendo Wii, as well as PC, including Mac and Linux. We've also developed multi-controller extensions for consoles, meaning that you'll be able to control your UI using more than one controller on that console. And this past year, we're very excited to announce that Scaleform is now available on mobile devices. And this includes iOS devices such as iPhone, iPad, and iPod, as well as Android devices such as the Samsung Galaxy tablet. And this also means that we've added multi-touch support to Scaleform, so you can do things like pinch zooms, and where games have like virtual joysticks and so forth, and you need more than one finger to be able to do something. That's all built into Scaleform's mobile support. We also now support Nintendo 3DS, and that means we also support auto stereoscopic 3D right out of the box for true glassless 3D. In previous versions of Scaleform up to 3.3, we supported the Sony PSP, and with 4.0 we now support NGP or Sony Vita. There are many major engine integrations for Scaleform already, most of which are provided by the engine developers, and these include Big World, CryEngine, Hero Engine, Fire Engine, and Trinergy. And in 2010, we were very proud to form a new partnership with Epic Games, in which Scaleform is tightly integrated into the UDK development system as well as Unreal Engine 3, and this is an integration that we help to maintain. Now, Scaleform uses a plug-in architecture that allows file I/O, image loading and creation, translation, fonts, HAL renderer, etc. to be customized for your proprietary game engine. Now all of this is thanks to our hardware GPU acceleration and a revolutionary patent-pending tessellation process. Again, the normal Flash player from Adobe is a software-based player, whereas ours is hardware-based, giving you that acceleration. And what we do is, if you know the Flash is basically 2D content, well, we take that 2D content and tessellate it onto triangles, which we can then send to the GPU to be rendered with hardware acceleration. So let's take a few minutes to talk about AMP. AMP stands for Analyzer for Memory and Performance. It's basically a remote profiling tool for Scaleform content, which allows you to, as its name implies, remotely profile the content on someone else's machine, or you can also profile the content locally. It allows you to monitor things such as CPU usage, graphics rendering, memory consumption, etc. Now, AMP was designed specifically for artists and UI developers, so that they don't have to get an engineer involved to find out why their content might not be running so hot at a particular point. It has real-time graphs, per-frame statistics, per-frame ActionScript function and source code timings, and quite a bit more. So let's see a little demonstration of AMP in action. So I've got one of our UI kits here loaded up. It's called the MMO kit, and we'll actually talk a little bit more about this kit later on in the presentation. But for now, I'm just going to go ahead and profile in AMP. First thing I want to do is bring up some basic performance metrics at the top here. You can see I'm getting about 500 frames a second on average. It's about 80 draw primitives, and my code execution and render time are mostly below 1 millisecond, which is pretty fast. But let's say that I've got some issues with my content and I want to find out what's going on in more detail. That's where AMP comes in. So we'll go ahead and pull up AMP. And here we see in AMP we've got several machines already discovered, people on the network that are running Flash content. I'm here at the bottom, so I'll just click on that. And right away we can see that we're profiling my content. So I'm going to change some of these levels here so I get a little bit higher detail. And I will restart the profiling. Now the first thing you notice is we have three basic displays here. We have one for CPU, one for rendering, and one for memory. And in each of these displays, these real-time graphs, we have sub-options. So under CPU I have display in advance, that's rendering and code execution. I can turn them on and off. So we see green is the rendering, and advance is in red. And of course this graph here is basically telling us per frame what the time to do each of those frames is. So we can see the height, the peak here is about 40 milliseconds. Most of the stuff is pretty low here. And then under rendering we have meshes, triangles, masks, and so forth. And then under memory, the graph is tracking the total amount of memory that's currently loaded at a given frame. So let's go back to the MMO kit and make something happen and see what happens in AMP. So let's say I fire that off. Go back to AMP. We can see right here where the change happened. I'm going to pause it. There we go. And I'll zoom in. There we go. Alright, so we can see that there was a spike here in code. So I'll click on that frame. Now if I go down to CPU, I can see the amount of milliseconds it took for all of that to occur. But I can actually click on ActionScripts tab and start to drill down into what's actually happening here. So if I click on this function, I can see that it was called 3 times, the amount of time it took for that to occur, and then over here I can actually see the code that was executed as well as the per line timing in milliseconds. It's very convenient to have this information. Likewise, I can click on memory, and down in memory I can see the total footprint of memory being used for images and so forth. If I click on images, again I can see the footprint, but I can actually click on these spots down here in the list, like this one, 256 by 256 bitmap, and I can see the images that are loaded in memory at that frame. And you'll notice that these images are actually packed together. These are the icons from the MMO kit's UI, and these are all being packed together as if they were one texture, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. But you can see here the memory it's using is 262K right there. Alright, so that's AMP in a nutshell. It's a very convenient tool to have. It has a lot more options that will help you out. You can turn on wireframe for your Flash content from there, overdraw settings, and a lot more. Stay tuned to Scaleform.com for an upcoming webinar on AMP where we'll show you how to profile your content and optimize it using that tool. Also with Scaleform, you get our Component Lightweight Interface Kit, or CLIC for short. Now, if you're familiar with Flash at all, you may know that Flash comes with a UI widget framework already of buttons, sliders, checkboxes, and so forth. The problem is that that framework is built for web applications, and so it's a little bit slow, not really well suited to game development. It has a lot of extra stuff that game developers wouldn't need. So we developed the CLIC system specifically for games, and the main goal of the framework is to make it lightweight in terms of memory and CPU usage and very easily skinnable, whereas the Flash version is kind of hard to skin. Ours is pretty much you use Photoshop and drag and drop and you're done. So CLIC is basically a set of ActionScript 2 and 3 user interface elements, and that is buttons, checkboxes, sliders, text fields, and so forth, as well as libraries and workflow enhancement tools that enable you guys to quickly implement rich and efficient interfaces for your game content. So let's talk a little bit about the Scaleform UI kits now. You saw one of them in action already a little bit, and we'll talk a little bit more about it. All of the UI kits that Scaleform has put out basically provide best practice construction methods as well as production level code and assets developed by us here at Scaleform using both ActionScript and C++ backends, along with detailed documentation, overviews of the features, content, and architecture. The point of these kits is to give you this best practice construction so that you can learn from it on how to build your own UIs, or you can use the production level code and assets and modify them as you need. Some of those kits include a HUD kit, a menu kit, and the MMO kit, which you just saw. The MMO kit in general, some of the things it demonstrates are bitmap atlasing, where textures are packed to improve rendering, and as well as being based entirely on our CLIC ActionScript 3 framework, and it includes things like drag and drop functionality as well as tooltips and so on. So let's just go back real quick to that MMO kit and kind of show you what we're talking about here. So this is exactly pretty much what you would expect to see in an MMO UI, and it's all rendering at less than 1 millisecond. We see here we've got a basic tab chat window, and this chat is right now being driven by a backend in a database. We have spell bar, ability bar, and so forth. You can fire them off. We've got tooltips. We've got inventory bags. Again, we have drag and drop functionality. We also have a paper doll with stats, a spell book. So pretty much everything you expect to see in an MMO UI, and gives you that best practice construction learning tool. And there will be more kits to come. So here's the part for all you guys that are already familiar with Scaleform. What's new in Scaleform 4.0? Well, let's find out. First and foremost, we really wanted to nail performance this time. It's always a key on our mind, and we spent the past 2 years developing a completely new multi-threaded core architecture and multi-threaded renderer. Now, again, I'm not the most technical guy. I'm not an engineer, but I do understand the concept of multi-threading, and I understand the performance gains that you get out of it. And it also means that our technology will now fit much better into multi-threaded game engines. And if you know anything about Flash, basically, Flash is composed of advance and display, where advance is your code execution and display is your rendering. And in previous versions of Scaleform, advance and display were tied together. They had to happen at the same rate. If they didn't, you might have strange artifacts in your rendering, or worse, you could even have crashes. Well, with our multi-threaded renderer and architecture, we've been able to desynchronize advance and display so that they can happen at different rates. Your display can be happening at 60 frames a second, where your advance could be happening at 1,000 frames a second. That's just some number I'm throwing out there, but the point is your advance can be happening as often as it needs to happen, and then it can send updates to the GPU and rendering when it needs to be done. And so by doing this, you're going to see anywhere from a 2 to 10x performance gain, which is a big win. Also, with our new renderer, we have an intelligent batching system. The point of the intelligent batching system is to help reduce draw calls. And so if you see this image down here, this is basically the MMO UI with a whole lot of windows open and a lot of things going on. And in previous versions of Scaleform, all of these items, all of these elements were considered separate draw calls. And so, you see here you're getting like over 500 draw calls for all of this information, and it's taking anywhere from 5 to 20 milliseconds to render each frame. With our new intelligent batching system, we are automatically combining similar objects at runtime. And so what you can see now, anywhere you see the color that is the same, so like on the far right here, all of these look the same, or these at the bottom are all the same. This means that these items have been batched together as if they were on a single texture sheet. And by doing so, we significantly reduce the draw calls, or draw primitives as we call them. And so in Scaleform 4.0 versus the 500 draw calls, over 500 draw calls, we're seeing just over 100. And instead of 5 to 20 milliseconds, we're seeing less than half a millisecond to 2 milliseconds to render the same amount of content. So this is a big, big win. Now, bear in mind that just like anything in the game development pipeline, any artist knows that you don't draw all the different body parts of a character on different textures. You draw them all on the same texture to eliminate draw calls. And the same thing needs to be true when you're doing your textures for your UI. Try to batch them together so that the batching efficiency is higher. Now, you can batch them manually in Photoshop, or you can use our tool GFX Export, which will batch them for you. But bear in mind that even if you didn't do this, our system is going to automatically combine similar objects at runtime. But by doing this, you'll even make it much better. Also, with our new renderer is our intelligent caching system. Basically in Flash, just like in Max or say Maya, you have a scene graph or a schematic where you've got all of the elements of a Flash file on a given frame, right? And what happens is that Scaleform walks that tree and sends that information over to the GPU to be rendered. Now, Scaleform 4's version of doing that is much more intelligent than previous versions of Scaleform. And what Scaleform 4 does is it walks the display tree once and caches it on the CPU, and then it sends that over to the GPU to be rendered. Now, from this point forward, instead of doing that every tick, it watches for changes in the tree. And if a change occurs, it then sends that change, and only that change, instead of the whole frame, over to the GPU, rather than sending it every single tick. So this gives you up to a 20% performance improvement as well. Here's some of the performance metrics. So based on all of this multi-threading and batching and caching, we're seeing some pretty huge improvements. If you can see there on display CPU, we're seeing on average 4 to 5x improvement. Draw primitive reduction is anywhere from 2 to 4x average improvement. And in real-world testing situations, we have the FPS HUD there. You can see the difference between Scaleform 3 and 4, anywhere from 1 to 5 milliseconds to render in previous versions, down to less than half a millisecond, and about a third of the draw primitives. And the same is true for the MMO UI. Significant drops. Bear in mind these are PC performance timings, so on console they're going to be a little different, but you will still see significant improvement. Also with Scaleform 4.0, we have a big one that people have been requesting now is Flash 10.1 ActionScript 3 support. ActionScript 3 is an order of magnitude faster than ActionScript 2. It tends to be, I've heard, anywhere from 50 to 100% faster. It's also a more powerful language than ActionScript 2. It's also strongly typed. And it is a better language for developers. It's more intuitive. It's a lot like JavaScript, whereas ActionScript 2 is a little archaic, has some odd conventions, a little bit harder to write. You're going to get an expanded talent pool now because you can also not only draw on ActionScript 2 developers, but you can also draw on ActionScript 3 developers, and there are a lot more of those guys out there. We've also upgraded Click to ActionScript 3. I mentioned that earlier. So there's Click ActionScript 2 and 3 versions. However, ActionScript 2 is not going anywhere. We're still keeping ActionScript 2 for legacy code support. Maybe some of you guys do like ActionScript 2 and want to stick to it. Or maybe you're in the middle of a project and you don't want to switch to ActionScript 3, which would be a big problem. Last thing you need is to switch mid-project and have all kinds of issues that you have to change. The good news is you can stay with ActionScript 2, upgrade to Scaleform 4, and still get all the cool new multi-threading, intelligent batching and caching, and so forth. This also means you get the Flash 10.1 features like multi-touch, which I already mentioned during the mobile presentation. Now for you coders out there, bear in mind that both ActionScript 2 and 3 virtual machines are optional. You don't need to link to both, thus saving on code size. And if you want, you can do everything in the back end with C++ or your game script. Very little ActionScript 2 or 3 needs to be written. Using our Direct Access API, you can communicate directly with Flash content using C++ or your game script. Alright, so let's summarize the presentation now. We're almost done. We can get to the questions and answers after this. Let's talk a little bit about the Autodesk Scaleform Advantage first. With Autodesk Scaleform, you're going to get a streamlined workflow and rapid iteration. Creating Flash content is relatively easy and painless. Iteration is a snap, basically. You're also going to get a multi-threaded renderer in core architecture. As far as we know, the fastest multi-threaded vector graphics renderer out there in the business. You'll also get easy integration into your proprietary engine, or if you're using one of the engines that's already out there that has an integration for us, you've got that. You'll also get great documentation and localized AAA support, and that localized support includes Korea, Japan, and China. And you'll also get lots of great tutorial videos, which I'm actually a part of making. You also get custom tools such as our AMP profiling tool, which you saw, and a lot of samples and other items like that, as well as our UI kits, which demonstrate best practice content creation, allowing you to either learn how to develop menus and HUDs or MMO UIs to run fast and smooth, or even to modify for your own needs. You'll get a mature code base. Scaleform has been around for a decade. We're in a 4.0 release. You're not getting something that's new and untested. We've been used in a lot of great games, and the developers that have used us have been generally positive, and they're using us for their sequels as well. So that means they really like us. And you get full source code access to Scaleform's. Alright guys, so that pretty much covers my presentation today. I hope you've enjoyed it. I enjoyed giving it to you. If you'd like to evaluate the technology, please stop by scaleform.com and check it out. We've got a developer section there. You can sign up for evaluation. We're going to open the floor up now to questions and answers, and Nate and myself will try to answer all your questions. If we can't, we can always take them offline and get back to you. Thanks again.